Thanks, Brad. I am Edson, and today I'll be presenting the results of a survey that we did last year. Um, Professor Mike Jenner cannot be here this afternoon, so I'm afraid you'll be stuck with me. I'm sorry. Let me begin by walking you through the trajectory that led us to this research. We thought it would be interesting to, before we proceed with the specific case studies, to have an overview of the trend that's going on in the industry. Um, Early research on journalists and how they knew about their audiences found that to a large extent, journalists ignored, if not rejected, audience feedback. And when we talked about feedback pre-internet, we were talking about letters to the editor or phone calls to the newsroom, and we still get a lot of those now. But also, we're talking about old forms of audience research, such as newspaper readership surveys and broadcast television ratings for broadcast stations. And while those early forms of audience research provided information to journalists about their audiences, journalists still had some reasons to doubt the accuracy and also the usefulness of these information from the audience. First, they are usually non-representative of the total audience, and also journalists are wary about audience feedback compromising some sort of their journalistic autonomy, that incorporating what we know about the audience and what we think they want would somehow impinge on editorial autonomy. But things have changed, and things are changing, and the audience itself has changed. Now, if a member of the audience wants to air something about a particular news content or the organization itself, he or she doesn't have to go through the traditional gatekeeping process and wait for an editor to approve his or her comment. He or she can just put something on Facebook or Twitter, and that is outside the control of journalists usually. And also, another thing that has changed is that now journalists have access to a wealth of information about the audience, and it's immediate, it's supposedly accurate, and it's also easily quantifiable. That audience feedback in many forms have become very omnipresent in the newsroom, so to speak. And so with this background in mind, we decided to put together a survey of American news editors. It's a web-based survey, and we work with the American Society of News Editors. We administered a survey between April and June last year. We sent an invitation to at least one top-level editor per newsroom, and in total, we had 113 members of ASNE who took the survey, representing just one organization in the sample. So who were these respondents? They were mostly males. 76% occupied a managing editor position or higher. 89% worked for newsrooms that had both print and online. And the average age is 49 years old. And most of our respondents have been a journalist for more than about 24 years. That was the average. So here are the things that we found. First, we asked them in terms of where do they get their analytics report. 55% said they get it from a third-party vendor such as Omniture. 41.3% said they usually get it from free online programs such as Google Analytics. And then we also asked who puts together the web analytics report for the newsroom. 51.4% said it's the newsroom staff that puts together the report for the organization. 22% said IT division, 11% marketing, 6.4% the corporate division. And then we also asked how much training they had in terms of using the programs that they are using in the newsroom. 51% said they had some sort of informal training, 24% had formal training, while 15% had no training whatsoever. An interesting pattern that we found was that in large newsrooms and organizational size, we measured it in terms of newspaper circulation. So for editors who work for newspapers that had newsrooms that had newspapers with more than 100,000 circulation, 38.5% of them had formal training, while the rest had 61.5 informal training. So I think this also shows us not only the level of adoption of web analytics in big newsrooms, but also the amount of resources that they put into adoption of web analytics. Not only are they adopting the programs, but they're also investing in some sort of training for their editors. And then we also asked them about the importance of particular metrics that they can get from web analytics programs. So we gave them these lists of most commonly tracked metrics, and then we asked them to rate in a 5-point scale from not important to very important. How important are each of the following metrics to the newsroom? We found that the top 5 metrics being monitored are number of uniques. 85% said they frequently or very frequently monitor or track a number of uniques. Most read, 83.6%. You have page views, top pages, and number of visits. 58.9% said they also track stories that are most shared on Facebook. 51.4% they track stories, most retweeted stories. And then we also asked them about how they are using web metrics in their news work. So we gave them some statements that describe different ways that newsrooms use web metrics information in their news work, and we asked them to rate how often they engage in each particular use. So top 5 uses of web metrics. First, 73.1% said they use metrics to decide if we will assign additional stories or coverage. 72.2% said to decide how prominently to display stories on the site. Also to help determine how to write the headline, help us design our website, and to decide if we will reposition a story. I think something that's interesting here is how 21.4% said they use web metrics to help measure the performance of employees. And this was a general statement. And I think a year from now, it'll be interesting to see where does this use of web metrics to evaluate edit performance of journalists, where does that lead to? Does it lead to, say, promotion, levels of promotion, or does it lead, are we moving into or some newsrooms at least, are they moving to a pay-per-click model, so to speak? So I think that's interesting and something that we should continue keeping track of in the few months or years to come. And then we also asked them their perception of how metrics have affected the news organization in general. So again, we asked them to rate the following statements in a 5-point scale, from strongly disagree to strongly agree. We found that generally, editors have a positive perception of how web metrics have influenced their news work. 90.5% said it has helped them better serve the audience. 86.6% said it helps us grow our audience. Only 39% said it has made my organization more profitable. And then for another paper based on the same data set, we also thought of looking at particular general categories of how newsrooms are using web metrics in different ways. And we did an analysis that found 2 main general categories of web metrics use. The first one is what we call the story packaging use. So we use web metrics to move around elements or story assets on the site. Say if a story is gaining a lot of traffic, we put it more prominently on the website. And that is type of use that is usually close to the end of the news production process. And then the second main category that we found is using web metrics for story planning. So for example, using metrics information to plan coverage, to decide where to deploy reporters, for example. And that comes early on in the news production process. Now, early research in web metrics found that most newsrooms use web metrics for story packaging, so using it more close to the end of the news production process. But what we found in this survey that's different is that more and more newsrooms are actually integrating metrics, the information they get from web analytics in the early stages as well of news construction, which I think also points to us how the increasing influence of audience feedback in the form of web metrics in the news construction process. And then we also looked at what factors affected the tendency to engage in a particular usage pattern of web metrics. First, we looked at factors that are associated with using it for story planning. And we found that newsroom editors working in newsrooms who reported that they frequently monitor web analytics, they also tend to use it more often for story planning use. And then we also looked at the association between journalistic roles and integration of web analytics and news work. Role conception is a tricky concept. It's basically a concept that refers to how journalists view their roles. It's difficult to observe, but it has good explanatory power in terms of accounting for how audiences behave the way they do. So we found that journal editors who conceive of their roles as a mobilizer, meaning it is my function as a journalist to shape public opinion, to move people to action. They also tend to use web metrics early on in the news construction process. In contrast, we looked at factors that are associated with story planning use. Again, the frequency of monitoring web analytics in the newsroom is an important predictor of using metrics for story packaging or using it close to the end of the gatekeeping process. And I guess this is the more omnipresent audience feedback has become, the easier it is for journalists to integrate it at every level of the news construction process. But also, if you look at particular role conceptions, the disseminator role conception, where you see your role as a journalist to disseminate information, and that's not really to influence public opinion, more of a detached, not involved, passive role of a journalist, that is an important predictor of using it at close to the end of the news construction process. In conclusion, I think new web analytics have provided journalists a lot of useful information in terms of understanding how the audience is using the content that we're providing them, and also in terms of what they're doing with the content we give them, and also how they're using the website. But I think to some extent, understanding why they're doing the way they're doing what they do, also understanding why they're using the website in particular ways, still remains to a large extent some form of editorial guesswork. And I think that's something that we should explore more in the years to come. Thank you very much.